Hello, everybody, and welcome to Voxel Viewpoint. I'm Ryan Shepard. With me today, I've got Derek.
Hey.
And Lee.
Hello there.
And today we're doing a bit of a end-of-the-year wrap-up, wrapping up 2019, talking about all of our favorite games, some of our not-so-favorite games, and then we're going to talk about what we're looking forward to in the future. We're also going to talk about what we think the best and most impactful games of the decade have been, because we're also closing a decade here, which is kind of a big deal. So yeah, we're going to spend a little bit, we're not going to spend too much time like really diving into a whole lot of these. We're just going to talk about what we liked about them, why they're on our top games of the year lists, and maybe talk a little bit of some spoiler stuff that we didn't talk about earlier, mostly because we may not have finished the games before we talked about them before, so we get a better picture of what they are as a whole at this point in time. So just a warning for that, we may talk about some spoiler stuff. If you haven't completed these games or you're interested in picking them up, I'm going to say we probably don't spend more than, say, about 5 to 6, 7 minutes on each game. So you can skip ahead for that if you want to skip that game, and but still listen to the rest. We're going in chronological order from when they were released, and we're going to start with Resident Evil 2. That's the remake of Resident Evil 2, called Resident Evil 2. And yeah, this was announced, last year. It was announced. When was it announced, Lee? Was it announced at E3 or was it some other time?
That was E3. Yeah, with that kind of secret, or not secret, but that kind of teaser opening, wasn't it? The mouse running up the thing, getting squished.
Yeah, it wasn't obvious that it was Resident Evil 2 right away from that teaser trailer. And then I think you were kind of knocked out of your chair when it...
I might have exploded.
Yeah.
I may have exploded on kind of stream.
Yeah. So it was a pretty crazy announcement. I think there had been some rumors, but nothing really solid. And then the game came out with Capcom kind of picking early in the year to kind of put out their Resident Evil games. They did it with Resident Evil 7, and they're gonna do it again with Resident Evil 3, although it's a little bit later than Resident Evil 2 was. And yeah, the remake ended up being extremely good. Like one of the best games of the year for sure. I'd say probably the best remake I've ever played.
Yeah, that was one of the things I was noting was like, it's as far as some of the like remakes and revamps we've got, this has been the most impressive so far.
Yeah, because they not only kept like the format of the original, but they kind of remade it in a much more modern gameplay sense, taking some of the cues from the post Resident Evil 4 gameplay, and just made a really cool atmospheric, fun, the going around the police station, everything was real fun to explore and find all of the secret areas, and slowly make your way through that in like kind of like a Metroidvania style fashion, and then going into the sewers below the police station and everything like that. So at least through my Leon playthrough, that was probably my least favorite part of it. I was kind of hoping for something a little bit more than that, something on the level of the police station, but it was still pretty cool. And I intended to go back and play through Claire's story, but I have not done that yet. I might do that now that we've finished up this year of cleaning up old games. Lee, as the Resident Evil as a Resident Evil person, what was your take on the whole thing? Like, what did it surpass your expectations? Was it were there some things that were disappointing?
Well, there are a couple of things that disappoint on a second playthrough, which I don't want to spoil. But the way the first, because it has that flip of the scenario where you see the other side. You know, if you play, if ever you play Leon or Claire, kind of, it's always the first scenario, but the second scenario you play after that is a flip of the other character, seeing what doesn't quite work as well as the original did. Because kind of they repeat the same things that you wouldn't repeat if it wasn't you're unlocking the same doors that Leon did, despite the fact they should be unlocked in the second scenario and stuff like that. Apart from that, it does a really nice thing that, because obviously it's well known, this series, for having one of the best remakes ever already. Yeah. With the original Resident Evil thing. Now the thing with that is it's nice because that replaced the original. You don't need to replace the original. There's enough difference with this that it still keeps the original, preserves it where it is. So you can go back and forth and it doesn't wipe it out. It's different enough and the same enough. Right. That it pleases both audiences, I think.
All right. For me, who never played Resident Evil 2, I'm not gonna. There's no need for me to go back and play that original game.
No.
But if you had that nostalgia for it, you could go back and play that and get what you want out of it, and still play this new one and get something a little bit different.
Yeah, it keeps it fresh. It keeps it fresh enough that it's different enough that you can separate the two, but join the two if you want. It's one of my favourite games, absolutely. Probably top to top.
And what about you, Derek? Was there anything that stood out for you?
For me, it was seeing it as like a next-gen title. So, the up-to-date graphics, the sounds are up-to-date, You're not just playing it off your TV now where headsets and surround sound headsets are more relevant. That coming into the terror that the games put out so many years ago when we were younger, like, you got that feel again from it. And that's what really sold me into this, was like, wow, this is what remakes, this is what's setting the bar for it. This is how it should be. Like, I feel like I did then, but it's updated and it's still like a kind of fresh feeling because you have a new look at it versus that blocky look that we had before.
Yeah. And, and like the stuff they do with Mr. X is really cool.
That makes it really promising for 3, the remake of 3. If they can expand that with Nemesis, you're in.
Yep.
I'm super excited for 3.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it too. I know it's not as usually held as highly as 2, but I don't have any experience with that, so
no,
it's going to be a new experience for me.
But where 2 is kind of spot on originally, there's things you could do with a remake of 3 that would improve it and take away those faults that 3 maybe has. So, whereas you didn't need to really with story and pacing, stuff like that, you can readjust that completely. Not really take much away from it.
I'm glad I last year I started to do the original playthrough of the first game, and now they're kind of like seemingly on pace to put out these pretty good remakes right along. So I guess I jumped in at a pretty good time.
Fresh.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's Resident Evil 2. That I'm gonna technically call that Voxel Voice's Game of the Year, because it's the only game that all 3 of us had on our lists. Do we have some matchups here with just 2 of us? But this is the only one that appeared on all 3 of our lists. So if you want to consider an official Voxel Voice Game of the Year, that's the one, Resident Evil 2.
Yeah.
I guess, yeah.
And now we're going to go on to Devil May Cry 5. Now, Lee, this is on your list. Tell me about Devil May Cry 5. What stood out about that game for you this year?
Oh, well, it goes a lot along with this thing. I think it's kind of the reinvigoration of Capcom. and what they've been able to do with their new engine, the new Resident Evil, and how pliable it is, how it can kind of go with a hard action game or a slower paced horror game, and it's really pliable. Now, Devil May Cry it maybe kind of got a little bit stiff, as like say Platinum come through and kind of did that like hard combo action type game. I think Platinum kind of really went with that. Kind of really went with that and took it a lot further than DMC ever did. And this is basically them coming back and being the daddies again, and kind of reclaiming their crown as the kind of the combo action genre. It's really good game, incredibly good game. If you're into that string together your sequences type game, it's really good. This new engine really does help it and really makes it spark more of a realism. It's kind of a weird amalgamation of the older games as they went from the fixed perspective to the kind of the free roam camera to some extent, or over the shoulder type camera.
So it's unlocked. The camera's unlocked in this one, right?
Well, no, it's like stuck to the shoulder, but before it was very much like for the first two, it was very much fixed perspective.
Yeah, like up in the rafters or something like that, right?
Yeah,
and like
the cinematic
God of War, like the old God of War and stuff like that.
Yeah, they called it cinematic, despite the fact that cinematic cameras used to move, but we'll ignore that.
I thought they call it isometric, right?
Kind of. It depends. Well, that's very much fixed as a kind of a skewed point of view, isn't it? Isometric. Whereas they kind of flip all sorts of cameras. It could be underneath you. It could be above you.
Oh, okay. So they move it. They do move it around, but you can't control it.
No. Yeah.
All right.
So, but yeah, it kind of really works on that, and it's weird because there is a certain realism to this new engine that I use, because I know you're a big fan of engines and the way they kind of use lighting off of the characters and the character models, the way they do that, and it's good to see how they can do it in a fairly realistic setting of Resident Evil, and then go for the real fantasy side of DMC, and it still works. Yeah, it still gives you that texture that you like.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. I didn't realize they both use the same engine.
Yeah, I think they used to use, for all of their games, used to be MC Frameworks, and now they just called it the RE engine now, and it's really invigorated them. It's nice. It's good to see that there's more things coming down the pike that they're going to be using it with.
Yeah. Well, it looks like RE3 looks good too, based on those trailers.
Yeah.
It does good, like it does good, like the lighting and the mood in Resident Evil 2 was really good, and the character models are really good too.
Yeah, it feels wet in the right way and kind of icky in the right way, and kind of
wet tech.
Skews of blood on the floor, and it's like no. Yeah. Or off the character models, so it bodes well for what they've got coming. Which it looks like we might have Dino Crisis back by all the sort of things, and that would be cool to see that sort of thing.
Well, all right. So Dino, I know a lot of people have, well, not a lot of people, but some people have a reference for Dino Crisis. Like, what was it? Dino Crisis kind of like Resident Evil with dinosaurs?
Exactly like that, to be honest with you.
Is that what you'd want today, or would you want something a little bit different?
You can do it better now, because essentially it was sticking the dinosaurs that are small enough to get into corridors and stuff like that, like velociraptors and stuff like that. But
okay.
Yeah. Hopefully now they might be able to open that up. But there's speculation. They think they do it. It's highly likely doing it. But if they don't, I won't lose much sleep, because Dino Crisis was a bit daft. Yeah. But then again, Resident Evil's a bit daft if you think about it. So,
yeah, well, Resident Evil has a much bigger fan base than Dino Crisis, I feel. So I wonder if instead of like doing a what they're doing with Resident Evil, where they're kind of keeping it the same, they would maybe take Dino Crisis in a different direction. Like, obviously still keep it, horror and dinosaurs, but maybe like Jurassic Park style or something, like big big showpieces and stuff like that. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it didn't help that they killed themselves off by making Dino Crisis in space. And once you do that, you can't really go back. Dino Crisis 3 was dinosaurs on a spaceship.
Yeah.
Which is like, yeah, okay.
Well, I mean, if you're gonna bring them somewhere, you might as well bring them to space, right? Once you put them on an island, where else are you gonna put them, right?
It's like when horror franchises go to die and they send like Jason Voorhees to space, or Pinhead to space, or Leprechaun. I think Leprechaun went to space at one point.
Or Critters.
Did Leprechaun go to space?
Who?
Critters in space.
The Critters were from space, so that counts.
Oh, okay.
This is a different This is a different podcast. Should we move on?
Yeah. Critters going back home.
Yeah.
All right. So that was DMC, DMC 5, Devil May Cry 5. No news on follow-up. Was there any DLC or anything for that?
No news on follow-up or anything like that. It's a self-contained little thing.
Okay.
Which again is nice in a way.
Mm-hmm.
These games are built for replay, like Resident Evil DMC. They're built for a replay, so you get more out of it.
Okay. All right. That's DMC 5. That was on Lee's list. Next coming up, I'm gonna talk about Satisfactory, Lee's secret favorite game.
It's my list of favorite puns of 2019.
Yeah. So this is the first-person factory building game that I've talked about several times throughout the year. It's in early access, so they keep adding to it, which is why I keep bringing it up. They haven't really added anything substantial to it in probably since the last time I talked about it. I think the last thing they added were trains and nuclear power, which I haven't even unlocked yet in my playthrough. But the game is just like, well, it's really satisfying. It does a good job of taking something like building a factory, which when I talk about building a factory, I'm talking about like these machines that you're building are gigantic. It isn't just like, like a top-down view of like a strategy game or something like that. You're doing this in first person, so you kind of get to see the scope and scale of your factories, which also means you need a lot of room. So there's that. There's like the planning phase where you have to plan out, making sure you have enough room. You're constantly kind of tearing things down and rebuilding them, because as you progress through the factory trees, you are getting access to new things that build, new machines that build things. So you just have to keep rearranging your factory to make room for all of that stuff. It's just really satisfying to, figure out efficiency. So like you have resources that you take and you turn into different parts using these factories. And, as you progress, you find out that, something that you used to have tons of resources for, all of a sudden your resources are running a little low because you're using so much of it. So then you have to go find another source of it and get that to your factory and figure all of that stuff out. So it's kind of like a never-ending treadmill of, continuing to build more and more advanced things. The other cool aspect of this game is actually the open world that it takes place in. A lot of these kinds of games, are procedurally generated, where you get dropped into a randomly generated world. Each one is different. But in this game, they decided to make the world that you're put into the same every time you start a new game, and everybody has the same world. So there's a little bit of a exploration aspect to it. So if you get a little bored with the factory building, you can go out and explore the world, and the world has all sorts of different biomes in it, like climates and biomes, and they all look really nice. And the building aspect comes in there by the fact that you can kind of build anything anywhere you want. So you can build like a bridge over a ravine, or a platform up to get to a higher area if you want to. You can just do that out in the middle of the world. And not only are there, extra resources out there, but there are also secrets. So you can get like power-ups for your factories to make them operate more efficiently. There's like crashed spaceships that you can get special things from. So that part of it is, it's fun to go out there and explore, but that's definitely where they're spending their least amount of time right now in early access. There's a lot of stuff that you can find and pick up that literally says like work in progress. Like this doesn't do anything yet, but it will, the more that they develop the game. So right now, it's a pretty incredible game, even in its state in early access. So I can't even imagine what it's going to be when they finally, put the finishing touches on it and say it's completely done. So I expect this game to, if not be on my list next year as well, maybe the year after, depending on when they actually get around to putting out the final version of it. Just a side note, this is the same developer that did Goat Simulator. So they have some of that humor mixed into this game. This game's a lot more straightforward than Goat Simulator was. It isn't as wacky and off the wall as that. But there is like a tongue-in-cheek kind of like mega corporation that you're working for, and there's some funny stuff around that. And also their like development blog and the videos they put up to talk about all of their updates. Like they all have a very cheeky, funny sense of humor and stuff like that. So they seem like a studio that has a good time making their games, as well as making pretty good games. So that is Satisfactory. Probably, looking at this list, probably the game I actually spent the most time playing this year.
Yeah, I'd probably say so. You were on that a lot.
Yeah, just because of the nature of it, it kind of never ends. So you just kind of keep going back and picking away at it. And it's one of those where once I started back up on it, it kind of would suck me back in for a while.
So it was also pretty interesting hearing like your stories from it, because we watched you stream some of it, and then you'd be like, hey, I went back because there was like a little update to it, and I found this and this.
Yeah.
So for it being in early access and like how much it's drawn you in, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah. I mean, I know some people be afraid of early access games, but if it's truly a fully featured game in its early access state right now, and they're just adding more onto an already completely working, functioning game. Like you can get to an end state, and it would take you a very long time to get there the first time you play through it. So I think it's only like $30 on PC. So definitely a good game that if you are slightly interested in it, picking it up now, maybe get it for a early access price, and then cash in that value as they add to it over time. So that's Satisfactory. The next game on the list is A Plague Tale: Innocence, which Lee and I both had on our lists. So I reviewed this game. You can check out the full written review on the website if you're interested in getting into it a little bit deeper. But to kind of summarize it, this is a kind of a narrative focused action adventure game, I would say. You play as a young girl of a kind of well-to-do family in medieval Europe, and this is around the time that the bubonic plague is going on. Although the plague represented in this game is definitely way more fantastical than what the plague really was. Like the rats that carry this plague, they burst out of the ground like geysers, and they strip people of their flesh in swarms in this game. So, you know, a little bit worse than the plague of reality. And that's kind of like where I think this game like really worked for me, is this kind of this balance between, you know, this is a very grounded, realistic, these are very grounded, realistic characters with this kind of supernatural force going on that you know, you're kind of like, it's never really fully explained, but you kind of get to the bottom of the mystery of why it's happening specifically to you and your family, and stuff like that. I think the acting from the actors they use to play the children are really good, including the few adults that are in the game. The game looks really good, like graphically. Like the character models and the environments are really striking and do a good job of like conveying the horror that these kids are going through. And I think the story overall, even though it kind of has a little bit of a cliched ending, does tell a pretty good story about how, like, you know, even though these are kids, they can still rise to the occasion and defeat the evil that they need to, like, because no one else is going to do it, basically. So I think it was a good message at the end, and the fact that the entire cast, pretty much the main cast, are children is kind of interesting for a video game, especially. Lee, what were your takeaways from this specifically?
I'm surprised. It's one of my surprises of the year because this came out quite early. I think what March, April.
Yeah,
it was fairly early, and kind of I did it, and it's a contained maybe 10-12 hour thing. I did it, I finished it, and I haven't gone back to it, but I found myself thinking about it as a game.
Yeah,
thinking about things and set pieces and kind of character moments and nice puzzle moments between these, almost like horror set pieces in a weird way, and then the real time puzzle element of getting through these sequences of the rats and this and the other, and mixing it with like human threats and stuff like that, and the way the characters and the environments and the setting and the vibe. I found myself thinking about it quite a lot, and it's one of those things, although I haven't gone back to it now, I can see myself, because the way it's built, I don't feel like it could have a specific age to it. There's no, I mean, it's kind of a fairly simple mechanic. All the way you get through the whole game. I feel like it's something I'd quite like to go back and experience later as a story, and I'll go through. And in a weird way, the gameplay elements don't get in the way of the story.
Yeah, there were a couple moments near the end where the stealth stuff kind of did get in the way of my enjoyment of it. But for the most part, you're right. It does a good, like, the few gameplay systems that are in it are pretty straightforward, and for the most part, it works pretty well. And I like the rat tech they have, where you can like move the torch around and the rats kind of like flow like water, almost like water or oil over the ground, and then they'll swarm back in when the fire goes away, which, you know, that plays into a lot of the puzzles and stuff like that.
does a good job of lingering in your brain a little bit. I've thought about it a lot.
Yeah.
And it did leave more of an impression than a lot of games. I've like a consistent moment to moment impression.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's a game that's going to hold up incredibly well. I hope it gets a bit more, because it didn't get as much recognition as I thought it should have done, maybe.
Yeah.
So hopefully that builds over time.
It was all in all, it was a small game from a small studio. So,
yeah.
Hopefully they put something else out just as good, because up until this point they've been kind of like the stuff they've put out has been not this. Let's just say it's been like like licensed stuff and like just like nothing particularly impressive.
Yeah.
But then this is like their first step into like something new and original, and I hope it's successful enough. It seems like it's been pretty successful for them, so hopefully they get to do a follow-up to it, whether it be another game in the series or a completely new thing. They definitely have some talent going on there. So yeah. Derek, did you ever end up playing this or no?
No, I didn't get to play it. I'd eventually at some point do want to pick it up though, because I've kept seeing things about it here and there, and it'll keep popping up from time to time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good, like, run it through in a weekend or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right, so that was A Plague Tale: Innocence. Next up is Lee's Void Bastards.
Oh, yes.
This I played this game too, and I did enjoy it for a good chunk of time. This is like a roguelike sci-fi first-person shooter with some like immersive sim, System Shock, BioShock elements to it, where the environment is just as useful to you as a player as your weapons, and a nice funny, cheeky story wrapped around it. So Lee, why don't you tell us what stuck with you with Void Bastards?
It's one of those things that just hooked me. It's like it's that style. It's a style I like anyway, with an option to kind of have, if you like the hook, the kind of that replayability of the ships being roguelike, and the map through the system that you go through to get to the. Could we explain what it was like? It's kind of make a route through the solar system to craft enough stuff to get to your end game, and there's enough of a loop in there that I have consistently gone back to it over time, so it's kind of really stuck with me. It's a good if people haven't seen it, because I think this was kind of under the radar a little bit. It had an initial spike and then went away, but it's got a good, like I say, the System Shock thing mixed with that weird, I don't want to say Borderlands style, because that's giving it that's a different sort of thing. More like, do you remember 13? The Ubisoft game, that very much comic book panel style aesthetic, which is far more pushed than Borderlands, mixed with the British sort of acerbic 2000 AD style humour, that arch humour, and it was just really satisfying to me. It always gave me a challenge, depending how far into the levels of the universe you want to go through to keep doing your loop. It always remained amusing to me. It's just one of those things that just hooked me. It's I find it's had infinite replayability. There's always something, although the ships don't quite recycle, but you the same class of ships you go on as you go through it.
Yeah. The ship like formats were the thing that kind of ended up that ended up being a little repetitive. Here's your medical ship and here's your dining ship and stuff like that, and that got a little a little overused. I wish there was a little bit more variety there. But I did like the fact that you could, before you go onto the ship and decide you want to go on the ship, you can kind of get an idea of what to expect Like, it'll tell you what kind of enemies are on the ship. It'll tell you if there's any sort of weird anomalies. Like, I think probably the most memorable one for me was when I went onto a ship and it just said that the power was out or something like that. Then I got there and there were no lights on in the ship. It was completely dark except for this, like, small radius in front of me, which is like, I guess, my flashlight or something like that. And you literally couldn't see anything in front of you. It was completely black. And you had to navigate the ship more based on sound and, like, familiarity with the way the ships are laid out rather than complete visual cues. So, like, basically, if you got... And it kind of worked both ways because, like, I was limited in my viewing ability to see, but the enemies were as well. So, like, you could sneak. It was easier to sneak past them, and, like, if you did get caught, you were really, really screwed because you couldn't see them, so you couldn't really attack back effectively. And so that was, like, one of the cooler parts of the game that I came across. But yeah,
big, but obviously, kind of, they do have those same templates of things. But I like the fact that you have a certain amount of these character classes of enemy you have on there, and it could completely change the way you navigate the same ship. So that's what kept it fresh for me. I think when I was going on the same ship, I had to use different tactics. But, like, the certain, especially the brutal, more brutey type enemies and stuff like that. So I was taking different routes. I was the more sneaky, So kind of that did open up for me more, I think, because of that. But I can see why people might bounce off it after a while because there are only about 4 or 5 different ships.
Yeah.
Maybe it'd be nice to see them expand to more ships, but
I think that's something that they could add in, like, just different ship types and stuff to make it a little bit more, to give it a little bit more longevity. But otherwise, I think it was a pretty good roguelike. You didn't lose a whole lot of progress when you died. Like, you kept your whole progression tree and stuff like that. Derek, did you ever get around to playing it?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, didn't this have, like, the weird, like, perk or mutation type things you could find?
Oh yeah. When you started a new character, you could have each character had, like, a weird perk, and, like, there's one. They're like, you could be a really tall guy that barely fit through doorways, or you could be a really short guy that like was looked like you were crouching the whole time. It would actually change your visual perspective.
Or the cross-eyed pilot that takes you places you don't want to go to.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, you click on it, like 20% of the time you'll jump to the wrong system or something like that.
Yeah.
That was funny. Yeah, that's kind of like where we were talking about with the humor and stuff like that. It's like Lee was saying about with the visual style, it was really cool the way they did that because none of the models were 3D. So, like, they would turn and it would, it's like old Doom is what it was.
Yeah.
It was.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah.
The old Doom where the models weren't 3D, they were 2D sprites, and then, like, but they would still, like, turn, and you tell that they were turning, but it's still a 2D image. It's very reminiscent of that, the way the enemies moved and stuff like that. So it's a pretty clever way to probably reduce your animation budget by quite a bit.
Yeah. Definition of a cult game, but if you know you love it, you love it.
Yeah,
but definitely it was like a cult game.
I think it benefited probably from being on Xbox Game Pass day one.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people picked it up on that.
Yeah.
That's how I played it anyway. And speaking of Xbox Game Pass day one games, I think Outer Wilds came out, if not the same day, within a couple of days of Void Bastards. This also came to Game Pass, and it was on PC too when it first came out, and now it's on PS4 as well. So this was a game that I'd kind of been looking forward to. Like, I had seen like some trailers of it. It was an indie game, so it didn't have a whole lot of advertising behind it. And the idea seemed cool. It looked kind of like a smaller scale No Man's Sky. You were just in a single solar system instead of an entire universe. And I didn't really know what to expect from it outside of that. Like, I knew I was going to be flying around to planets in a spaceship and exploring around, but I didn't really know what to expect beyond that. It turned out that this is one of probably the most like original takes on this type of game that I've ever seen. And it's extremely unassuming. Like, you start out and it feels like a pretty normal game. You're walking around this primitive alien village. You're like part of this alien race. You're talking to people. They're kind of like I said, they're very primitive. Like, their village is all like built into like tree houses and trees and stuff like that. But they have just started to figure out space travel. So you talk to your scientist mentor, and he's like explaining to you all of the stuff about like you're going to be the next astronaut. There are all these other astronauts that have gone out before you. You should go meet up with them. But you're special because they just figured out this tool that you can use to read these ancient texts from this, what they assume is their kind of forebearer race, like a forerunner or something like that. And that ends up being like the big trick of the game, where you're going around and finding these it's basically graffiti. That's how this forebearer race wrote. They wrote on these big giant tablets, and you kind of use this translator tool to read what they wrote, and you're reading things that nobody in your civilization has ever read before, because you're the first person to use this and take it out into space. And so this game is all about exploration. There's no combat. There's no enemies. You don't get any guns or anything like that. It's all about flying your spaceship around to these handful of planets. There's only like 6 or 7 actual like things in the solar system you can land on and explore, which, when you first start out, doesn't seem like a lot, but it's kind of like this this moment where you're landing on these planets, and they are so much more dense and so much more complex, and there's so much to explore on them that these 7 planets end up turning into like a 25-hour exploration experience. Going inside of them, going into these ruins that these aliens that were there before you left, and learning their story is the huge driving part of the game. And it's incredibly well written. There's no like spoken dialogue. Everything is just text based. But like what we'll talk about with Control in a little while, the writing is so well done that you're being told information about how to explore and figure out all of the mysteries of the solar system through almost like diary entries of this previous race. So they're like communicating with each other. They all have names. These people that have been long gone for a very long time. And you get to know them as characters. They each have their own personality. They're like, some of them are, brother and sisters. They're mothers and fathers. They're like romantic partners and stuff like that. And it's ends up being like incredibly emotional as well, learning about these characters just by reading their words, and then figuring out slowly unraveling the mystery and the inevitable tragedy of the solar system you're in. Because what you find out happening is the entire solar system is on a 22-minute time loop. Every 22 minutes, the sun goes supernova and everything gets wiped out, and you start over from the very beginning of the game. There's a story reason as to why you are starting over. It has to do with the alien race and you being able to remember all of your stuff, all of the stuff that you've done previously, but the world resets. So like if you opened a door that was hard to get to on your previous run, that door will be closed the next time you go, so you have to go through the whole process over again. And it ends up being kind of like a little bit of a open world Metroidvania in that way, where you're not gaining any new abilities like physically, like you're not getting any new tools or new weapons or new ways to unlock things. The abilities you're acquiring are knowledge about how to navigate the world and navigate the solar system and figure out how to make your loops as efficient as possible to get as far as you can to get the new piece of information you need to move on to the next thing on your checklist, so to speak. And it just, right off the bat, it hooked me, because it was something like the way that all of this comes together, the way it all works together was so original and interesting, and like I needed to know what the next thing is that it was going to tell me, right? I needed to know the next step of the story, the next figure out what happened to this solar system. All of that said, there are moments where it can get confusing, it can get overwhelming. There's a very little tutorial, but there's very little guidance in the way of this is what you specifically should do next, and this is where you need to find it. Like, there are no waypoints, there are no quests, there are no mission markers. Basically, you have this rumor map that's like, if you think about like a detective trying to solve a crime, he's got pins and photographs strung together with string and stuff like that. You have something like that on your computer in your spaceship that logs all of the stuff you find over time. So as you fill that out, that's kind of like your guide on where you should be searching next. So you can look in there, it can be like, okay, here's, I'm just going to go with one specific example so I don't spoil too much of it, but like the first planet I went to was, it's actually two planets, but they're considered one, called Ash Twin, the Hourglass Twin. Basically what this is one planet is covered in ash and the other planet is like this barren rock planet, and they like revolve around each other in an orbit. And over the course of the 22 minutes, all of the ash from the ash planet transfers over to the rock planet, kind of like an hourglass. So what this does is, at the beginning of the loop, the rock planet is completely barren and you have access to just about everything on that planet, but you don't on the ash planet. By the end of the cycle, you can't access tons of stuff on that rock planet, but you can access a whole bunch of new stuff on the ash planet because all the ash is transferred over. And you have to learn that. You have to learn at what point in that cycle is this door that's only available for maybe 5 minutes of that whole cycle. When is that going to be accessible to me? And I need to be there for that to get in and find this piece of information that I need that's going to help me figure out what the next step of the process is. And that's kind of that's a big part of the game, being in the right spot at the right time. There are rules that they set up because the game, I'm going to hopefully wrap this up soon. The game was originally designed as a way for these college students to present the uncertainty principle of quantum mechanics, which basically states that if you're not looking, if something isn't being observed, it can be anywhere. Oh no, wait a minute, hold on, sorry. It means you can't tell something's location, and it's exact. You can't pinpoint something's location and its exact speed at the same time, because if it's moving, you can't pinpoint its location. But if you take a picture of it to see where it is in a single point in time, you can't tell how fast it's traveling. And this science and other bits of science and everything are all woven into all of the puzzles and story of the game. So you have to learn all of these rules about the solar system, and how these rules operate within the confines of the game and stuff like that, to figure out how to access these areas. And it's unbelievable how it all ends up coming together. Because once you take off from your initial location, you can technically go anywhere in the solar system, and you can pick up the threads to any of these stories at any point. You can pick up, so there's a quest to get to what they call a quantum moon, which is this moon that keeps traveling throughout the solar system. You have to figure out how to land on it. The steps to figure that out are significant. There's a lot of rules that you need to know. There's a lot of places you need to know where this moon is going to be. And you can start picking up these pieces of information anywhere in the solar system at any point in time. So it's not like a linear quest that you need the information boom, 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 boom in a certain order. You can pick it up at any time. And the fact that it all ends up coming together and making sense in the end is incredible. The way that they wrote this game, the way that they executed on just about all of its mechanics are unbelievable. The fact that this is basically their first game, and such an original take on something like this, and they kind of nailed it the first time is crazy. And it all wraps up really well. That tells you an incredibly detailed, incredibly moving, science fiction story, science fiction on the 2001 Space Odyssey kind of level, not like Star Wars, where it's all about laser guns and shooting stuff. It's more like the theories of space travel, deeper than that, what you were talking about the other day, Interstellar, Lee. It's on that level of science fiction. So, and it ends. That's the way it ends. It ends in a kind of profound way, a lot in the way that those kinds of movies end up ending. And I got a little frustrated with it, and I stepped away from it. But like Lee, you were talking about with Plague Tale, I kept thinking about it throughout the year, and I kept trying to go back. It's getting a little stuck. Eventually, I did have to look up a couple of guides here and there to kind of get me back on track, because the game is really long. It's like I said, easily 25 hours long on your first playthrough. And the crazy thing is now that once you know what you have to do in order to technically quote unquote beat the game, you can do it in one 22-minute loop.
Oh.
Right from the beginning of the game. Because, like I said, there are no tools that you unlock. There are no abilities you unlock. It's all what you know, what you've learned from exploring that solar system. Okay. So once you know it, you can do it immediately.
Okay. And so that's like a legit 22 minutes. It's resetting you.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like I think the only other game that's really done something like that would have been Final Fantasy 13 Part 3, where the game was 13 hours. Mm-hmm. And as soon as you start, there's a timer up in the corner that counts down as you're playing through.
Yeah. The one that they say that they took inspiration from was Majora's Mask.
Okay.
Because that has a timer on it, and you need to complete certain things on certain days. And that's basically what this is. Except Majora's Mask has had combat and fighting and stuff in it, but this has none of that. It's all, everything you do is based on your knowledge, like what you've learned about the world. And now that I know how, there's even an achievement in the game to do it in one loop, technically quote unquote complete the game, because there is there's a main story thread, and then there are kind of offshoots of it to kind of flesh it out. But that main story thread can be done in one loop, right from the beginning of the game, if you know where you need to be at what time and get what you need to get when you need to get it.
Gotcha.
Got a similar loop. It sounds to. You ever played a game called The Sexy Brutale?
No.
Which sounds awful, but it's like a top-down, steampunk murder mystery in a loop of an hour. You have to solve all of the murders that are going on in this weird 1920s Art Deco type thing within an hour before the loop resets. And you have to try and subvert, kind of nix the murders and stuff like that. Yeah, but it's I like that loop of you kind of trying to whittle all of your work down to that kind of that small.
Yeah, it's kind of like roguelike, but not quite, because you're not really losing anything between loops. You're actually only gaining things. You're only gaining knowledge and on how to complete the next thing. And as a result, I can't go back to this. I'll never. Maybe in 5 years, I'll be able to go back to it and kind of have a good experience with it. But I won't be able to play this game and experience anything like I did the first time through, ever again in this game.
You need to forget it again.
Yeah, I would need to completely forget everything, literally everything about this game, in order to have the same kind of experience with it. And there's so many moments that I was playing this game that my mouth was just dropped on the floor, when you cause it's like I said, it's like the solar system, and you have these 7 planets, but then when you start exploring these planets, there's so much more than what's just on the surface of them. They're not just these round orbs. You go in and there's an entire underground city that's been built underneath one of these planets. And like I said, I don't want to talk too much about it and ruin if somebody's gonna go play this game. But that's just the kind of thing that every moment of this game is that. Every moment of this game is holy shit. like, I can't believe this is here, or holy shit, I can't believe that that's happening right now, or like once you start unraveling the story and you start to get to the end of it and you start to realize where the story is going, it's just like one, you could call them twists, but it's more just like one revelation after another, where you eventually realize where it's going, and then it wraps it up extremely well at the end as well, which is something that a lot of games don't always do. So yeah, that's my game of the year.
You got that in under 22 minutes, Ryan.
Yeah, I know. That was, any longer, and we would have had to start it all over again.
Reset.
All right, so that was Outer Wilds, not to be confused with The Outer Worlds, which we'll talk about in a little while here.
Which I kept doing.
Right, yeah. A lot of people have been doing that this year. Yeah, it's still on Game Pass on Xbox, so if you wanna get it there, that's where I ended up playing it. But it's on Epic Game Store and PlayStation 4 now as well. So if you're interested in it, go pick it up. Hopefully I didn't ruin too much of it for you if you listen to this. So some of it, I think the loop aspect of it has been out there quite a bit, so you might already know about that if you've kind of heard about the game, but there's still tons of stuff that I didn't even come close to talking about that you'll be able to find and explore in that game. All right. Moving on to, it's me again. Crypt of the Cadence of Hyrule, Crypt of the Necrodancer, featuring The Legend of Zelda is like the full title of this game. Anyway, this is another roguelike. This one is not quite as brutal as some of the roguelikes out there can be. Basically, if you've played Crypt of the Necrodancer, what that game is a action game, a rhythm action game where you have to move and attack enemies on a beat. So it's like a 2D top-down game, and each level area, each screen is broken up into squares, and on each beat you can move, up, down, left, right to adjacent squares, and basically in order to hit an enemy, you have to jump into their square on the beat, and that'll hit them. And there's different varieties of enemies where you have to kind of like circle around them or dodge projectiles and stuff like that. What's cool about this is it takes place in the Legend of Zelda universe, so the aesthetic and there Zelda's in the game and Link's in the game, and all the enemies are Legend of Zelda enemies. You're going to Hyrule Castle and Lake Hylia, the Gerudo Desert, and stuff like that. So if you're a Zelda fan, if you're nostalgic for that, this is a really great fresh take on that kind of that story sequence, because it's still a Legend of Zelda story. So you're still the hero and you're going around collecting special things in order to defeat a final boss at the end. So that formula hasn't really changed too much, but what's really cool is the rhythm-based gameplay that they put over it, and it took me a little while to get used to. There's a couple of modes that you can choose. You can choose like you have to follow the beat mode, or there's like it's almost like a turn-based mode where enemies only move when you move. So if you're having trouble with the beat, that can help you a little bit to figure out the gameplay and stuff like that. And yeah, it was just kind of like a It's not very long, so it was like a nice, quick, refreshing time Zelda experience, really. And the soundtrack is just phenomenal because this is all based around rhythm, so the soundtrack needs to be really good. It needs to have a heavy beat to it, and they just remixed all of these original Legend of Zelda songs into like it's kind of like a techno, kind of like a house beat music kind of thing, and it just incredible. Like the soundtrack to this game is one of the best I've ever heard. 'Cause like it keeps that Legend of Zelda original flavor that you know of, but presents it in a whole new way. And yeah, it was just a fun, quick romp through a pretty cool game. That's obviously just on the Switch because it's a Zelda game, but really good Switch game. Really good Switch game for both handheld and if you want to dock it. One of two Zelda games that came out this year, and in my opinion, the better Zelda game that came out this year. And
check this one out.
It's a really cool. It's really cool to see Nintendo, allowing developers to take their properties and kind of do something different with them. So I hope they allow more developers to do that down the road, because this ended up being a really excellent experience. I got a full review for that game on the website as well if you want to read that. Yeah, so I mean, neither of you grabbed this year, right? I was the only one.
No. Yeah, I think you were the only one.
Yeah. I mean, if you're into that, if you're into like a neat Zelda experience, I would recommend picking it up.
Yeah. I keep meaning, so I just haven't got around to it.
Yeah. All right, so that's gonna bring us to Dragon Quest Builders 2, which me and Derek played. This is on Derek's list. It's not on mine, even though I played a huge amount of it. That weekend I had it, I kind of I put a lot of time into that game.
Yeah, I think every time I talk to you, you're like, "Hey, did you do this yet? I just did this.
Yeah,
I just did this."
And I was like 20 hours ahead of you.
Yeah, I was like, "Damn, I've been playing it a lot," but
yeah.
Damn, Ryan.
Yeah, and then I got to a point where I just kind of fell off of it. I've been wanting to go back to it. I might. They just put it out on PC. I played it on Switch, and there was some performance issues on Switch. They weren't game breaking, but it was a little disappointing. So I might look into grabbing it on PC and starting over, and continuing on from there. But I'll let you take the reins from here and explain what you liked about it and everything.
Okay. So for me, Dragon Quest Builders 2, it's the second one in the series. They're kind of like a Minecraft type clone in the Dragon Quest universe, but instead of just being like a huge open world that you do whatever in, it's kind of more like quest and story focused. This one more so than the first one, which was also pretty good, but this they just kind of built and really expanded what you could do as far as like crafting the towns, what you can make. There's once you start unlocking pieces and stuff, there's just an insane amount of stuff you can build, and some of the creations I have seen have been absolutely amazing. Like this kind of stuck for me as like one of my games of the year because it was one I was wanting, but I kind of found it in a place where I didn't think I was going to get it. Because I never really played the first one because I heard a lot of mixed reviews on it, and at the time I was playing a lot of like playing Minecraft and stuff, and I have that on like PC and the PlayStation. So like I'd use the realism mods on there because that's the main thing I'd wanted was like I wanted a Minecraft, but like amazing looking.
Mm-hmm.
Like just smooth, polished. Some of the mods that you can get do a good job for it, and but for me, Dragon Quest Builders really kind of like nailed that everything from like your NPCs to your character models to like the environments you were in. Um, it just stood out more to me than like Minecraft does. Yet I'll still spend hours and hours and hours in Minecraft with friends, dicking around and building different structures.
Mm-hmm.
But having the quest and the story and the look and feel of like an upgraded Minecraft in a Dragon Quest universe, which is one of my favorite RPG series, next to Final Fantasy, is what really drew me in and kept me in. I actually had a couple different people play through it. Like Ryan, you had got it. My brother had got it.
Mm-hmm.
And like in that short time, you said you played a ton of it. You got really attached to it. My brother played through and beat it even before I did.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just for me, it was like the building, the feel, the look for it. It was just like no like one thing stood out, but it was like it was what I wanted at that time from
Yeah.
Minecraft. But this gave it to me. That kind of
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah, no, like you said, it was nice to have some structure to the building and crafting formula. Like I played Minecraft quite a bit myself, but then ended up, eventually that game ends up being you have to make your own fun pretty much.
Yeah, and you fall away and then come back, and you fall away and come back.
Yeah, and it's fine, and I'm sure, it's the biggest game ever made. So there's definitely something there that people enjoy. But for me, I just was looking for a little bit more structure, and the Dragon Quest Builders 2 did that pretty well. The only thing that kind of ended up pushing me away from it was, you'd spend all this time like on that first island building out that farm, and then you kind of just left it.
Yeah.
Which was kind of a bummer. Then you went back to your main island and you did some stuff there, but then it kind of really rushed you onto the next part. And I just didn't, I don't know, that part of it didn't really click with me. That second island wasn't nearly as interesting as the first island either.
Right.
So that was kind of like where I ended up falling off on it. Like I had so much fun on that first island building the farm, and then kind of didn't like where it was moving me forward. So I just kind of something else came out or whatever. So it pulled me away from it.
Yeah. No, I kind of hit that snag too, and it seems weird because a lot of these games that have like the desert biome type deal are always the ones that I hate.
Yeah, I usually like aesthetically the desert. Like I really like usually the desert, like in Zelda, going to the Gerudo Desert is always one of my favorite parts because of how it looks. But yeah, just the way that they did it with this, where you're going into the mine, and it was extremely repetitive, way more repetitive than the farm. That just was. It ended up being kind of a bummer. It was a lot smaller of an area too. You couldn't like go off and go on an adventure or something like that. You're kind of confined to that mine and
that little
bar
bit
area
and doing stuff in there. But then for me, like it picked up again once we went to the next area where you're rebuilding the castle and the defenses and stuff like that. So it was just
okay. Yeah, I didn't even get there.
Yeah, so the next spot after that, then it's like a castle you're rebuilding, and you have to like build up parts of the walls. You get these new like defenses and stuff you can use, and you're setting it up for like a kind of horde mode type attack that's coming on.
That seems pretty cool.
It kind of picked back up for me there because I was like, okay, cool, this is cool. That was Act 2 was kind of boring.
Yeah.
And then you come back into this, like, okay, this is cool now because you're building up these stone walls, the castle. You got like shields you're putting out, defense units and stuff like that. So it was interesting, Like I said, it was just kind of like that little bit of extra that I want from Minecraft. It gave it to me.
Yeah. It was cool going to those random islands too, to kind of find those resources.
Where you could go through and then you could get like the wasn't it like almost infinite resource for using it once you like
I'm not sure. I only did one island, and so I didn't really. The way that they kind of tutorialized stuff there was like a little sketchy on some of that stuff, like explaining all of the mechanics and stuff. especially for that. I was just like, okay, I'm on this island now. I'm gonna go check off these things on this list and
Yeah, I think
have
that's
some
what
fun.
it
But I'm
was
not
like
really
a
sure.
close to infinite resource if you could find everything on it. Like it was like a scavenger hunt that it sent you on.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I think if you completed the entire island, it was a certain set of stuff you would then get for going back to your main island.
Okay. Yeah, I like I said, I think I'm gonna grab it on Steam especially if it's on sale or something like that, and kind of start over. And
Yeah, that would definitely be interesting too to see if they give it like mod support too, because I think that's
oh
where it
yeah,
could really, really shine.
yeah, definitely. All right, that was Dragon Quest Builders 2. That's on. I think it's just. Well, I think it's
PlayStation,
PS4,
Switch.
and
Yeah.
PC now. I don't know if it's coming to Xbox or not. All right, continuing with Derek's games, Remnant from the Ashes, the kind of Dark Souls-ish game with guns from Gunfire Games, the folks that brought us Darksiders 3. Derek, why don't you talk a little bit about this and why it stood out to you this year?
Okay. So Remnant, as you said, Remnant from the Ashes, it's a Souls-like game. Probably my favorite one that came out this year, kind of closely tied with Code Vein, but I think this one pulled out over top just because I found a lot of people interested in it that didn't normally play Souls games, and a lot of people that came into playing it with me, and the people that I'd go help out as we'd run through the different areas and get them geared out, like really enjoyed it because it was somewhat easy to pick up and learn, but then as you started gearing out and going through it and resetting the areas, which it did a little which was like unique to like a Souls-like game, um was just really interesting because each time you would find something new. Like you might find one item, but you can't do it with anything this kind of like run or playthrough. But then you have the choice where you could reset that playthrough and start from the beginning area again, and then continue onward. And then that rendition of the map now has something you could interact with these different types of items. Uh, so it just kind of like it kept it constantly fresh and interesting, and it was challenging until you found like your build and your play style and like what really stuck, and then it became easier. But then as you start progressing on, and every time you reset, it gets a little bit progressively harder. And to me, that's kind of where it shined because it wasn't just like okay, it's hard from start to end. It kind of like it might start off rough, but then you learn it and it gets a little bit easier. Then you kind of get your set, but then the game's like, okay, this is your style. Let's make it a little bit harder, and then you can continue on.
Okay.
So it was just like it was an interesting take on the formula, and now they kind of like they took a play from Diablo 3 and they added in adventure mode, which allows you can go in and pick what you want to do now. So if you know there's like certain bosses would only show up, because that's the other thing too, is like it would lay out certain bosses depending on how it rendered that playthrough for you. But now you have the option to go into adventure mode, and then you can pick certain areas and setups that you want to play through so that you can get those pieces and the gear you want or the encounters you want to try to do. So that was different too, because normally it's just play through these areas, find it, make it through, and then like that's it.
Okay.
So it's kind of what stuck out for me. Like I said, like for mine, the couple were kind of more like straightforward. Like it was different, but it was in like I love Dark Souls, I love Bloodborne. Code Vein was also like very high up there for this year, but I think this one just stuck out because it was gunplay, not sword play, and I just saw a lot more people that don't normally play that type of game kind of came into it.
All right, cool. Yeah, I played a little bit of it and I enjoyed it, but it's very very hit or miss with me with these Souls types games, whether or not I get into them. And this one, while it was cool for a little while, didn't keep me coming back to it.
Yeah, it kind of got to a point too, like where you needed that group of people then. Like if you had a couple people you're playing with, you needed that to progress, and even that was hard. Like there's like a boss still that I haven't beat just because the battle's so ridiculous.
Yeah.
This was a weird one for me, this one, because I enjoyed it as I was playing it, but I think this is just personal taste, but I previously played their previous game, which was Darksiders 3. And I went through. I'm one of the few people that actually really like Darksiders 3. I know it's very divisive, and I felt like I was going through the same because I think the way they've managed to get this off the ground is they kind of reuse a lot of environmental assets from Darksiders. You know, you'll be in you're literally the same church. You'll be in literally the same sort of car park setup. So I felt like I'd already been through it, so it was repetitive for me very quickly. So I might have enjoyed the loot more, maybe.
Yeah.
If
so
I
it'll
felt
be
like I hadn't
interesting
been
then
through...
when I go to play, because I have Darksiders 3 to play, so it'll be interesting then doing the reverse of what you did, was, you know, you played Darksiders 3 and came to this.
Yeah.
Now when I'm going back to this, I'm like, oh wow, there's this, but this was in here, which is after.
Yeah.
I noticed that a little bit. It was like it was very like that first area you come out, that decrepit city street that you come out to is very reminiscent of the beginning of Darksiders 3, where you have like the city street that's kind of overgrown with foliage and stuff like that.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, so that's tasty, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was Remnant from the Ashes. That's on Xbox, PC, and PS4. If you want to pick that up, pretty good co-op Dark Souls-ish experience with guns. All right, so now we're going to talk about Control. Or I guess I'm going to talk about Control, because it's only ended up on my list. So this is Remedy's game this year. Their I guess what would be their follow-up to, well, I guess Quantum Break, right?
It's kind of like the greatest hits of Remedy, isn't it?
Yeah, it kind of is. Yeah. So yeah, the last game I played of theirs was Quantum Break, and I think I enjoyed that a little bit more than a lot of people did.
No, I like that one. Yeah.
I don't think it's great, but I did end up running through it enough times to get like all the achievements and stuff. It was a pretty easy game to get all the achievements in. But I didn't really like the whole TV show aspect of it. I don't think that was necessary.
No.
This game is similar to that in a lot of ways in terms of gameplay. And even a little bit of the visual style, but what really did it for me here is the setting, which is the oldest house, which is kind of like this it's the headquarters of the Federal Bureau of Control, which is like this FBI for all of these weird supernatural things that are going on in the world. It's kind of like X-Files meets Men in Black kind of thing, where like nobody actually knows they exist or what they're doing, and they go out and they investigate these paranormal kind of occurrences, and the building itself is one of these paranormal occurrences. So you go through this game and you're exploring it, and it has all of this totally weird shit going on in it. You're finding all of these documents from this bureau that are explaining all of these weird things that they call objects of power or altered world items. And they're just like normal everyday things that are essentially possessed with some paranormal entity, and they exhibit some bizarre behavior. And the writing around that, the way that they explain, like slowly fill in the blanks on a lot of these items, the way that they paint this incredibly strange and bizarre world that is still framed around our own reality. Like everything happening in modern day, everything looks normal except for this one slice of the world that nobody even knows about that's going on. And you pick up these pieces of paper and they're talking about these objects, and then you start actually encountering them in the game because they've all been brought back to this oldest house for security reasons. And there's a story about the scientists that are in charge of studying these things. They kind of like broke this this dimensional wall between the paranormal and our reality, and this evil force is coming through and kind of wreaking havoc in the facility. And like the actual real story of why you're there and what you're doing isn't nearly as interesting to me as like the story of the oldest house itself and the characters that were part of the experiments that went wrong and stuff like that. That was really what the driving force was for me for this game. And it's just, written so well. They actually tie in Remedy's previous games into the story, into the lore that's being fleshed out as you go along. And on top of that, I think the gameplay is pretty solid. The shooting is good. Pretty good progression of upgrading your weapons, but the special powers you get are really cool too. You like telekinesis, pulling things toward you and throwing them. Being able, eventually you gain the ability to like fly around and hover, which is really cool, like a shield you can put up to protect yourself. The progression on those is pretty cool, and it looks really good, like visually. I was fortunate enough to play it on PC, so the performance was pretty good. They do some really cool stuff with ray tracing if you have a graphics card that can pull that off. Really cool like reflections and lighting in the way that like the environments fall apart and debris just flies everywhere. It reminds me of like every combat encounters, like the hallway scene in The Matrix, where once you start shooting stuff up and throwing stuff around, it just all kind of starts to crumble, and by the time you're done, there's just this big, huge mess on the ground. And yeah, it was enjoyable from start to finish, and like that, exploring the lore of the oldest house and everything like that was the big driving force to get me through to complete it. And I'm looking forward to the DLC that they've talked about that they're going to put out later on. That's going to flesh some of that out even more.
Oh, it's a shame this. Now, I a little bit of an update, I guess, because when we talked about this, we did a review on this.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a big Remedy fan, but I rolled off it pretty quickly because if I remember rightly, I thought it was quite claustrophobic with the style and the environment.
Mm-hmm.
And I found it a bit overbearing. I bounced off it, if you remember rightly.
Mm-hmm.
But then about a month ago, I gave it another try, and it started to open up. Mm-hmm. And then it's like I got it. I really got it. It's like this. I'm in. And I kept going, and it breathed a bit more, and then the lore got better, and it was like, no, give me all that lore, yes.
Yeah.
And then the performance tanked. When I say tanked, I mean like teens tanked. Every time there's combat, every time the physics go mad, and this was so close to actually.
The console performance is a big disappointment for this game.
And I'm on an X. So it's not like I'm on a base.
Yeah, it dogged it from the very beginning. It was criticized for it, and they apparently haven't done a very good job of patching. Excuse me, of patching it up.
As of the beginning of this month, it's still hitting the teens when combat gets heavy.
Yeah,
and I'm so frustrated because I nearly was like I had it and it was there, and it's like I probably, because we started talking quite early about this list. This could actually kind of come back, and I'm back in again. Mm-hmm. And it just, I just couldn't get past the performance. It completely takes you out of it.
Yeah, no, that flow. It would have been. I wouldn't have been able to deal with that either if I had had to deal with those. Excuse me.
You know, in mid-20s I could have handled, but teens, no, it literally slows down to a crawl. And it's like, I'm going to have to wait now until if they do patch it out, and then I'll go back there, and I'm not going to, because I'll just sour on it completely otherwise, I think.
Yeah.
I bounced off it more than once now. But
yeah, there's enough there's enough moments in that game where you need that performance to be definitely better than the teens in order to probably even get through it, because the responsiveness just won't be there.
Sometimes you're not sure whether it's frozen or not, because it kind of just literally hits a brick wall. It's like, what? Such a shame, because it completely turned me around.
Yeah,
and then it lost me again.
Yeah, that's too bad that ended up happening on the console versions. But for me, it ended up just that story, the world, like I had said back then, probably not since Rapture and BioShock had I been like fully pulled into the a setting as much as I was with the Oldest House in Control. Let's move on to Borderlands 3, Lee. Why don't you take us to Pandora and all the other spots throughout the solar system?
It's Borderlands again. I just squeeze this in. There's a couple here that I could have coming up that
not talked about.
Because when we do this for kind of the rest of the community, sometimes we do a top 10. And there's one of these that I had to just squeeze out of the top 10. There's another one of these that's coming up that I just had to squeeze out of the top 5. But this, although this has problems with it, like maybe long arc narratively, I think this does enough to kind of get in there and give me the Borderlands thing that I like. It kind of makes advancements with the gameplay, kind of, because Borderlands pre-sequel was overstuffed. It tried too much. You know, with Borderlands, there's a certain thing where you want the same but different, but don't make it too fat, otherwise you're going to lose the purity of it. And this kind of strips back from all the maybe the bits where they went too far in the previous game, and it kind of boils it back down. Long arc narratively, maybe it's not as good as the others, but I think there's enough refinements to the gameplay and the loot and the kind of the extra little things they do with the gun system is enough to make it really kind of spread out for me. And kind of, it's not quite as good as 2, but then that's Borderlands 2. I think that's, if you get Borderlands 2, you know, you know what I mean. But it's kind of, it doesn't quite hit that, but it's a tall order if you like that style of game.
Yeah.
So,
I played it and I enjoyed it for like that weekend that I put into it, and it just wasn't enough there to keep me coming back to it. I ended up going back to Control and finishing that instead. So it just, and then I never went back to Borderlands. So it's fine, it's competent, but it, like you said, it is just another Borderlands. It didn't really do anything to, like, in my opinion, justify the extremely long time between Borderlands 2 and this one. There wasn't anything that was like, oh my god, this obviously they should have made Borderlands 3 because look at this. It was more just like, all right, yep, this is more Borderlands, but
Borderlands comfort food.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
And I know, Derek, you played it too.
I played it. I'm actually still getting ready to go back to it to clean up quests and stuff, and I have the first DLC they put out. But yeah, it just doesn't like it was fun to play, but it didn't capture me like Borderlands 2 did, and then like the DLCs for Borderlands 2 were so like, whoa, this is awesome. We'll kind of have to see what happens with this because the first one's like some heist thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was fun to play through. But like you said, it was kind of just like, all right, here it is.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, just
one of those things where I feel like you have to wait for in a weird way, it's best to wait for the complete package to turn up, and absorb it all like that.
It sounds like what they would call a Game of the Year edition of Borderlands 3, by the way. The complete package.
Be the one. Even if it's not Game of the Year.
Yeah, the complete package.
Yeah. They always seem to work the best.
Yeah.
Mm.
All right. That was Borderlands 3.
Mm.
That was on PS4, Xbox One, and PC. Now we're going to actually kind of stay in the same atmosphere here with The Outer Worlds, which was on Derek's list. This is Obsidian's throwback RPG to like the Fallout New Vegas time frame, but a little bit more refined, a little bit more stable,
yeah,
a little bit more colorful, a little bit more science fiction. So Derek, why don't you run us through what stood out with The Outer Worlds for you?
Okay, so for the first thing was I enjoyed New Vegas, and coming off last year's Fallout 76, kind of still being like kind of sour in the mind for the Fallout series. Seeing a new game of that kind of type come out was like, okay, this could be interesting. Anything's better than what we got with 76, and it turned out to be a lot better than what we had gotten from the main Fallout developer. And everything, like you said, this one's more colorful. Your cast of characters are more interesting. Each of the ones that you can recruit in have like completely distinct personalities, and they're constantly interacting with you and talking to you as you're making your decisions out in the world and playing through the story. That's kind of like the stuff for me that stood out, because it still has like, you're still looting, you're getting your guns, you're getting your armor. It's got like a little bit of crafting, a light food system. You're not worrying about like radiation or anything like that.
Story wise and everything like that. Have you completed it? Did you get to the end?
Yeah. Okay, sorry. That's where I was kind of going with that. I actually just the other day finished it up and got to the end. So as far as like the story is, it's more like sci-fi space corporation based versus being, like post-apocalyptic. And finally getting to the very end of the game, and then finding out why this corporation and board were being like they were, I was like, oh, well, shit. Yeah. Okay, this kind of just changed, like, in this one moment of, what, at least with the ending that I had where they're talking about this, I was like, oh, okay, this changes everything I just thought about what was going on.
Yeah, so did you feel like it wrapped up well, or
yeah, I think
did your choices actually end up having consequences, did you feel?
Yeah, no, like the way they show it at the end, where they kind of show like when certain things you do happen, they're like, okay, this happened, so this is what's going on now, post game. This is what would happen if you were still in the world. These are the events that would be unfolding. Some of the stuff did, some of the stuff didn't. But then getting to the end realization of what's really going on, you're like, okay, can I have that? What's next? Like, how are we gonna find this out? Like, it makes me hope that there's like a DLC that expands on this, or it gets a sequel that now expands on this part of the problem, which to me I think would be a great way to continue it on.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was fun to play. It was that Fallout-esque game that kind of like brought a really redeeming light to that kind of like this genre of game.
Yeah.
And like they didn't have VATS, but they had a slowdown system, which I thought was a lot better than how VATS works. It kind of kept the game going at a pace to where with VATS, you're stopping, you're analyzing, you can kind of take that time to pinpoint exactly what you want to do. To where this, you had like a time slowdown that was in place of that. So it just kind of kept it a little bit more fast paced than you would play that, which was kind of nice as well.
All right, that is The Outer Worlds. That's on PS4, Xbox One, and PC. Now we're going to jump into our last game on our Best of the Year list. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. Now this is the Respawn Star Wars game. Their first attempt to out of their comfort zone of like first-person shooters, and the first attempt in a long time for anybody to make a single-player Star Wars game. And surprisingly enough, it ended up being pretty darn good. It has some rough edges for sure, some performance issues, and could have used a little bit extra polish. But as a Star Wars story, I think it's extremely good. I enjoyed the cast of characters, the story they tell, and the kind of both, large scale story that's told and the way the characters change and mature over the game. I think the lightsaber combat, excuse me, is really good. It's very satisfying to deflect lasers back at stormtroopers, and the abilities you acquire over the course of the game do a very, very good job of making you feel extremely powerful by the end of that game. This was something that I wasn't able to talk about when we first talked about this game because I hadn't beaten it yet. But now that I've completed it, the Jedi you are at the beginning of that game is completely different than a Jedi you are at the end. By the end, you're like force pulling stormtroopers, stabbing them, doing all sorts of like throwing your double-bladed lightsaber around in a circle and killing like a bunch of guys at once, force pushing a group of guys off of a cliff, and just like kind of like how
the dual wield attack.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's right. You literally break your lightsaber in half and have two.
It's like
one,
your
one in each hand.
overpower type move.
Yeah. That at the getting that at the end was crazy. And it does so much damage too. So you kind of like end up getting this power fantasy that like the Force Unleashed games kind of gave you, but kind of only peddled in. This like you kind of build up to that so you feel really powerful by the end of the game. And then they do a really good job of making you feel extremely petty and pathetic.
Yeah.
Which we won't...
I was going to mention that if you didn't, but not in like detail.
Yeah, I'm not gonna spoil it for you if you haven't gotten to it yet. But the end of this game is pretty incredible. There's a great, not just this particular part that I'm talking about, but I feel they wrap up the story really well. And yeah, they do a really good job of ramping you up into be extremely powerful, and then kind of like say, yo, guess what?
You're not.
You ain't all that.
Yeah, like.
So that was I feel like that was handled very well.
Oh no, it was. I felt like that, like playing that moment. I felt that sitting here in my chair, like that was the real big like, wow, yes.
Yeah. And yeah, like I said, they do a good job of wrapping up the story arcs, and like there are a lot of great characters, like the captain of the ship, the pilot, has a lot of good lines, and he doesn't feel like he's he's filling in the kind of comic relief role, but it doesn't feel like it's forced. He feels like a good character that is also filling in this kind of role that is in all of these types of movies. And yeah, in terms of like the story and stuff, I feel like it could be a Star Wars movie, the way that it's presented.
Like, an honorable mention with that about the story is, right now it is the only video game that's part of the canon.
Right, yeah. Except for like the licensed one, like the ones that are based on the movies.
Yeah, but I don't count those. As far as like, yeah.
It's technically Star Wars canon, and it fits like it feels like a Star Wars movie, and the Metroidvania stuff is kind of cool, but it ended up being more a little bit more tedious than I wanted it to be. Unfortunately there's no. Once you get onto a planet, there's no fast travel around that planet. So, like, if you missed something, like, completely on the other side of the play zone, you have to navigate your way through. And even though you're unlocking shortcuts, some of those places aren't quite as shortcutty as you'd want them to be when you're kind of going around trying to play, trying to collect get 100%, and a lot of times it's just going to be like a new lightsaber piece or something like that, a cosmetic item that isn't really worth the journey. But overall it was a very enjoyable game, and it was on me and Derek's list, and I'm glad I put in the extra time to finish it up, because yeah, like I said, the end of that game is really pretty great.
I'm so close to squeezing this on, but I'd spent more time in Borderlands than I did in this.
Yeah,
this was inched out. This gave me what I wanted, kind of the scope and the depth that I wanted from like a Force Unleashed, which is quite narrow in scope. This kind of opened up everything, gave me everything I wanted. Excellent game, excellent Star Wars game, probably one of the best Star Wars games.
Yeah,
it's been a good year
definitely.
for Star Wars, really, because kind of Mandalorian and
it was
the kind of the rebirth of Battlefront, this, and also Rise of Skywalker came out.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see how they fuck it up next year.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they're bound to do something.
Yeah. Is there anything coming next year?
They announced the Mandalorian season 2 is going to be fall next year. But I don't know if there's anything else in between there though, like at all. I'm not sure.
No. I know they're already gearing up to start a second one of these. So
yeah,
it was obviously successfully enough.
Yeah, no, I think I don't know. They set this up as a possibility of a sequel, like so.
Yeah.
They could follow this storyline, or they could go somewhere new. I don't know. Yeah. So that was Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, a really good Star Wars game that came out in 2019. All right, that's gonna wrap up our best of the year games. And yeah, overall it was pretty good year and decade for games. And I think we all came out on the other end better people, honestly.
Aside from you being broken by the Quiet Man.
Right, and you being Derek being broken by Left Alive, and Lee being broken by the Pandas.
Why? It's unnecessary. This has got to stop now.
Does it?
Let it go.
New decade, new animal. I'll let you choose.
New you, new bamboo.
Yep. Yeah, new you, new bamboo.
There you go.
That's good.
Call it that.
All right, that's going to wrap us up for our Game of the Year 2019, whatever you want to call it. We'll be back next year with something. Some of the same stuff, maybe some new stuff. We'll see. But yeah, stay tuned, and thanks, guys, for hanging out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll see you next year. Thank you for joining us on this very special episode of Voxel Viewpoint. If you'd like to hear or see more, please consider subscribing to us on your favorite podcast app, subscribing to us on YouTube, or visiting voxelvoice.com, where all of our great content comes together in one place. Also check out the Voxel Voice Facebook group, where you can join in on the discussion with a great, like-minded community.